Shabbat shalom v'moadim l'simcha, chagim uzmanim l'sason, as we learned earlier. A famous midrash regarding the Song of Songs, our traditional Pesach scroll reading, which we chanted back on first day Yom Tov, tells of the people of Israel standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, as God wonders to whom the Torah can be given in order to ensure its perpetuity. Our ancestors shall be our guarantors. The people tell God, who replies, I have found fault with them. Our prophets shall be our guarantors, they say, and God responds, I have found fault with them too. Finally, the people suggest, our children will be our guarantors. And God agrees, declaring, this is a good answer. For their sake, I will give Torah to you. As we sat at our Seder tables on Wednesday and Thursday evening, we too may have been reflecting on this notion of how our stories, our traditions, our values, our customs could be safeguarded as they are passed down to the next generation. Not to fret, however, for you are in good company, as our rabbis too were occupied with this eternal question when they formalized the steps of the Seder. It is perhaps the very reason why the core mitzvah of the Seder is the Magid, the telling of the Exodus tale, which places education as the key to continuity at its core. In fact, the rabbis of our Mishnah in Pesachim 10 are so concerned with the children that the children present at the table are told the story as part of this chain of transmission, that they provide explicit instructions for how to fulfill this obligation. The Mishnah outlines how, at the raising of the second cup of wine, Chan haben shoel aviv ve'im ein da'at baben aviv melamdo. Here the son asks their father, and if the child does not have the knowledge or the faculties, the father teaches. Of course, let's take this in a more gender-inclusive direction in our times. So that's part one, this injunction to ensure that the child receives an arguably Jewish education in the first place. Yet that is not enough for our Mishnah, for our rabbis. After inserting our 4 questions, more about them in a moment, how is the parent to instruct their child? Lefi da'ato shel ben aviv melamdo. According to the knowledge or faculties of the child, the parent teaches. In other words, we must not only teach the child, but also to use the popular adage, meet them where they are at, or as our parasha may have described this week, panim el panim, face to face. Although there are guidelines as to where we begin the Magid, from Arami Oved Avi, my father was a wandering Aramean, it is upon us, the teachers, to then tell our children the story in a way that is appropriate, relevant, and meaningful for the age and stage of the child. With education as its focus, in what other ways does the Haggadah assist us with an effective educational framework for our children in order that we may safeguard a vibrant Jewish future? Let's go back to these 4 questions as an example. Firstly, because it is usually the youngest child who is asking the questions. Although this can be slightly intimidating, especially if the youngest at the table has not had this opportunity before, it conveys the message that the Seder is also for them, that they belong there, and it also encourages their curiosity. Perhaps of equal import is the signal sent that, when there are invariably a few stumbles, or if the child is particularly young and has a very soft, small voice, that we, the adults, the teachers in their lives, will be there to have their backs, guaranteeing their security in turn. Additionally, they are taught to be invested in the conversation and to ask the questions, even if they are only just comprehending the answers. How many of you at your Seders sat with a little one asking the questions on your laps and then had everyone join in to sing back the responses? chametz u'matzah. And then everybody would sing back, halayla hazeh, kulo matzah. Halayla hazeh, kulo matzah. The 4 questions thus become a model of a dialogic approach to teaching, which educational counselor Joy A. Norris advocates for in her book, From Telling to Teaching. She writes that learners learn best by getting engaged with the new information, by talking about it, using it, making sense of it, and filing it in handy places for future use. Fascinatingly, she points to the power of open questions in this dialogic endeavor, and it's worth noting that she describes 4 types of questions in her book. There are closed questions, meaning a simple yes or no, recall questions which test memory, information questions in which we request data, and finally, open questions. In Norris's words, these take the learner to a deeper and more reflective level of thinking and set those thoughts into motion. Manishtana halayla hazeh, and our ears perk up. Our mind wanders to everything that makes the Seder special. We instinctually look around and pay attention to the child or the people singing these questions. And we reflect on the history of our people and the memories of our families and our childhood. An open question. Another similar paradigm presented by a Haggadah is that of experiential learning. Pesach, after all, is the ultimate experiential Jewish holiday and was always designed to be. Our Talmud teaches us that we are to keep our children from falling asleep by distributing roasted grains and nuts, and as Rabbi K mentioned on first day Yom Tov, by literally pulling the table out from under them, all for the purposes of prompting the children to ask why. In the Seder itself, we don't just read from the pages, but seek to make them come alive. We ask our children to help hold open the door for Elijah to symbolically dip their fingers into the grape juice in remembrance of the 10 plagues. They hunt for the afikomen, and in Sephardic homes they might whack each other with spring onions or leeks during Dayenu, and the list goes on. Equally, in our own homes, I'm sure we have our own unique twists, whether it's table decorations, costumes, or unique family melodies. Educational theorist John Dewey's well-known work, Experience and Education, addresses this idea. He advocated that an intelligent and thoughtful, i.e. effective, education was to factor in the life experience of the learner. We are the sum of all that has happened before we walk through the classroom door and the skills we have gained leading up to that moment, which open new worlds for us. A child who has recently learned to speak or learned to walk has a whole different frame of reference than they did prior. A child who grows up in the country versus the city will see their universe in an entirely different way. Moreover, Dewey writes that if an experience arouses curiosity, strengthens initiative, and sets up desires and purposes that are sufficiently intense to carry the person over the dead places in the future, that slight tension and fear of the unknown, then experience is a moving force. Put differently, experience ultimately leads to greater growth and development. Perhaps this is why our memories of camp, where we might learn to play games, study in Chavruta, sing songs, and observe Shabbat immersed in community and Jewish time, and so on, these stick with us far longer than a lecture in a crowded hall ever will. Now, these educational tools might be all well and good, but we might ask ourselves, why are they so important to ensuring that the next generation are, to circle back to our midrash, guarantors of Torah in all it encompasses? Our Haggadah might grant us one suggestion, because teaching is the ultimate act of bravery and redemption. Our Haggadah reminds us that lo et avotenu bilvad ga'al kadosh baruch hu, ela af otanu ga'al imahem. Not only was it our ancestors who were redeemed by the Holy Blessed One, but we too were redeemed with them. In other words, we tell this story at every Seder, every year, precisely for the sake of our children. Through our obligation to teach them, we experience together that collective redemption from slavery in Egypt all over again, and we acknowledge that as much as we are their guarantors, they are ours too. At this season of Pesach, then, this ultimate festival of Jewish education, let us consider the many ways that we can fulfill our obligation to provide a meaningful and relevant Jewish education for the children in our lives, which ensure a vibrant Jewish future, and here at Holy Blossom, and for the Jewish people as a whole. We can send them to our Holy Blossom Youth Education Center or Early Childhood Center, and the offices are right behind me. We can send them to Jewish day school, to summer camp, to trips to Israel, and the list goes on. We can subscribe to PJ Library, bring them to Little Blossoms, family services, Tot Shabbat, or simply ensure we light Shabbat candles with them on a Friday night. Finally, to summarize in a blessing better than I ever could, I'd like to end with these words by Jewish poet liturgist Alden Solovey with his prayer for before studying Torah. Our Torah, God's Torah, this Eitz Chaim, this tree of life that has sustained us for millennia, must be replanted in every generation, taught, tended, loved, cultivated deep in the fertile soil of our souls, so that righteousness and mercy will take root in our hearts and bear fruit in our deeds. God of wisdom, source of wonder, let my teaching today become another seed of your word, bearing blessings for your people, bringing light into the world in service to your holy name. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Ken Yiratzon and Shabbat Shalom.